Good evening. This is a call to the order of the Bridgeport Board of Education Finance Committee. Today's date is Thursday, September 29th, 2022. The time now is 6:41 p.m. I'm Christine Baptiste Perez. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee in attendance. And in attendance for the Bridgeport Board of Education Finance Committee, we have Ms. Bobby Brown and Michael Macarone. Also in attendance, we have Board Member Albert Benahan and Board Member Joseph Sokolovic. The first item that we have. Good evening. The first item that we have on our agenda is discussion and approval of minutes from May 31st, 2022.
So move.
Nothing's been moved yet, Ms. Brown.
Oh, sorry.
Just for practical learning experience, I'm not a big fan of so moved. Robert's Rules really wants to emphasize board members saying the motions they want to have, but I know it's habit. So for now, I'll entertain anyone that would like to move a discussion and approval of the minutes from May 31st, 2022.
I would like to move that we have a discussion of the meeting minutes from last meeting.
You'll move for discussion or approval of the minutes?
Approval of the minutes.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table for approval of the minutes from May 31st, 2022. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we have any edits to the minutes or any discussion? Okay, seeing that there's no discussion. Ms. Brown, did you have something to say?
No, I'm all set.
Okay, seeing that there's no discussion, all in favor of approving the minutes from May 31st, 2022? Can vote?
Aye.
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 The motion passes, so the minutes from May 31st, 2022 is approved. The next item that we have on our agenda is a budget variance report for the 21-22 school year. And for staff, we have Ms. Marlene Siegel.
Yes, good evening. This is Marlene Siegel. I'm the Chief Financial Officer. I have asked someone to give me presenter rights so that I can put a document on the screen. I see that has not been done. Is there someone there from IT?
Yeah, that would be Rita. Let me see here if I can do it.
All right, well, we'll have to proceed then without being able to share the screen.
We'll wait a second and see if we can get it.
I've sent emails to Rita and I have sent a chat message. If we can take a minute recess, I'll try and call her on her cell phone.
I think that's a good idea. Does any board member want to move for about a brief 5-minute recess?
Second.
Someone has to move it.
I move.
Second.
What are you moving?
It's gonna take a while.
I move to take a 5-minute break.
That motion was seconded by Ms. Brown. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We have a 5-minute recess.
I got it.
We gotta get people to have it.
Do you know in the interim if we can mute our mics?
No, those are for.
No. So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are we ready to proceed? Good evening again to everyone. I'm going to present a brief summary in regard to the 2021-22 final fiscal condition. The financial condition report as of June 30th of 2022 was posted after the end of year close on August 31st, and that was done on September 6th. The EFS reports, EFS is the acronym for Education Finance System. Those reports, unaudited as of September 1st, were completed on time on September 1st, and those reports have also been posted to the website. The 2022-23 allocation model and budget plan were also posted on September 6th. Now, with regard to the end of year close, we did
Point of
end.
order, Ms. Siegel, could you make the screen a little bit larger for us to see?
Yes, certainly. It is zoomed at 150 now. I'll go higher. And
Let's
let
try
me know.
200.
Yeah, so that's 170. Is that large enough?
Bigger.
Okay. How's that?
That's good.
That's fine.
Fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Right. We did end the 21-22 fiscal year with a net surplus of about $2.6 million. It's important to note that in 2021-22, we had withdrawn $1.5 million from the Internal Service Fund reserve in order to ensure sufficient funds to balance the budget. The final surplus was actually $4.146 million, which, when reduced by the $1.5 million that we were able to return to the Internal Service Fund, resulted in the net surplus of $2.6 million. So the net surplus was added to the Board of Education's Internal Service Fund and will be held on deposit for withdrawal in subsequent years when needed to balance the operating budget. Now, in the Food and Nutrition Services budget, we also ended in surplus, and that amount was approximately $6.4 million. This was also deposited in the Internal Service Fund, but it's important to understand that in regard to Food and Nutrition Services, at the start of the fiscal year, the district makes a deposit from the district's operating budget into the Internal Service Fund for the health insurance, specifically the employer share of retirees, all retirees. So we do that at the start of the fiscal year. At the end of the fiscal year, if there is a surplus in the food and nutrition budget, then we move those funds into the Internal Service Fund and we reimburse the district for the district's annual payment to the ISF that was made at the start of the fiscal year. So in light of the significant surplus, we are deducting $1,250,000 for both the retiree contribution and also a supplement for potential workers' compensation excess cost that could occur in the future. So that amount belongs to the district. It's on reserve for withdrawal in the future. And I'm going to show you this evening the summary table, which is part of the budget gap plan. I will show you how that amount is added to the total deposit on reserve in the Internal Service Fund. Now, in addition, we are going to shortly restore to the food nutrition budget in 22-23 $1 million for equipment. In 21-22, there were orders for essential equipment that could not be fulfilled due to supply chain issues. In 22-23, starting in July, the Food and Nutrition Services Department has been placing the orders for the equipment. And they were directed to place those orders as early as possible in accordance with the procurement regulations, so that there is ample time in the current fiscal year for those orders to be fulfilled by the vendors. So we'll be transferring back to Food and Nutrition $1 million. So the balance of approximately $4.1 million is on reserve in the Internal Service Fund, and that amount is restricted to food and nutrition services use only. And this restriction will be strictly enforced in order to comply with regulations governing the use of federal and state nutrition funds. The Food and Nutrition Services Department is fully funded by federal and state grant funding that pertains to federal and state resources for the provision of food services to our students. So any surplus beyond the amount that they owe for the cost of retirees and workers' comp belongs to Food and Nutrition and can only be used to provide food and nutrition services. Now, why did the operating budget end in surplus? There are several significant factors, so I want to briefly review those factors. In 21-22, a high number of vacancies for teachers, paras, and other personnel categories occurred due to the continuing labor shortage. So the number of vacancies covered by substitute staff was higher than the opening projections, resulting in additional savings. In addition, the number of teacher positions filled by teachers in pending cert status was relatively high during the school year. Pending cert teachers are paid $250 a day. Excuse me, that is a typo in my document. Sorry about that. With health benefits until they receive certification. The third factor was special education, in particular out-of-district placements. The out-of-district expenses were lower both in 2019-20 and 2021 and 21-22 by approximately $1.3 million. However, we should note that the costs for other services, such as speech services and occupational therapy, continue to increase. Nevertheless, we did realize some savings in this particular area. In 21-22, the number of out-of-district students was 365, a decline of 50 compared to the prior year of 2021. And the prior year was 415. The lowest number since 2011-12 was 275 in 13-14. So in the last 10 years, the lowest number was 275. We're now at 365. The excess cost cap was 18.02% compared to 16.52% in the prior year, an increase of 1.5%. But even though it increased, it was still relatively low compared to prior years. So the cap in 19-20 was 29.11%. The cap is the percentage that the district has to pay for an out-of-district placement after paying 4.5 times the NCEP, which is the net current educational expenditures. Also for legal services, we allocate over $1 million each year to ensure sufficient resources to fund monthly charges for representation, plus potential legal settlements. In 21-22, fortunately, that budget line ended in a surplus. And finally, we utilized ESSER funds to the greatest extent possible for services that arose from the pandemic, including for technology services, curriculum renewal services, and services for our English language learners and special education students. So for example, there were 4 new kindergarten ASD classes opened, and we funded those classes in the Essa IDEA grant. We funded 8 special ed resource teachers in Essa 2 because the needs arose from the pandemic. We funded ESL teachers in ARP Essa last year, and we're now funding 3 teachers. Why the decline? And the reason is that we have received additional funding in the state bilingual grant as well as Title III, which is the federal grant for bilingual education. Also contracted psychology, speech and nursing services. And another example would be transportation to the expanded sites in the summer special ed ESY program. ESY is the acronym for Extended School Year. So in summary, in terms of the reserves on deposit in the ISF, for the Board of Education, we had a prior balance consisting of 20.7 million that had 3 parts: the pre-18-19 surplus prior to the advent of the Connecticut Partnership, and then in 1920, our first pandemic year, and in 2021, our second pandemic year, we were able to realize savings. So we carried forward 20.7 million. At the end of 21-22, we have added almost 3.9, 2.6, our net operating budget surplus, and $1.25 million from food and nutrition for the retirees and the workers' comp reserve. That total is 24.6. Also, we were pleasantly surprised that within the Internal Service Fund, which is the repository for the payment of health insurance for both active employees and retirees, and the repository for the payment of workers' compensation claims, we were pleased that the year ended with a surplus. Both the city and the Board of Education realized a surplus, so I'm calling it an internal surplus or an ISF generated surplus. And you may be wondering, well, why would that happen? I believe the primary reason in last year was most likely lower cost factors in the retiree group, and possibly lower workers' comp expenses. That may be an anomaly. This has not happened in my experience in Bridgeport in the last 10 years. So I don't have confidence that it's going to happen again in 22-23, but we're very pleased that we do have approximately $3 million that was generated within the ISF itself. And so we have a grand total of 27.7 million. Now, these funds are on hold to help balance the operating budget in the current year and close the budget gap, which we'll discuss in the next topic, and hopefully to help close a gap in 23-24 as well, and try to mitigate the fiscal cliff. For food and nutrition, once again, in summary, the total available to food and nutrition is $4,170,597. That is net of the transfer of $1 million from the ISF, from the food and nutrition surplus back to food and nutrition in 22-23 as a credit for the purchase of the equipment. And it's net of $1.25 million that was added to the ISF as the food nutrition contribution for the food nutrition retirees and the workers' comp reserve. And once again, that amount is in effect reimbursement to the district for the, or most of that amount is reimbursement to the district for the district payment into the ISF at the start of this fiscal year for retiree health insurance. So I've concluded the presentation. I'll stop at this point and ask if there are any questions.
Okay, Ms. Brown, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Macarone?
No questions, just now. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sokolovic?
Yes, yeah, we see a grand total of 27.7 on reserve. About what percentage of the budget is that? The overall budget?
Well, the total budget is for the current year, city and state share, 262 million.
So roughly 10% on reserve. Okay.
So that is, well, I'll give you an exact figure in a minute. So it's about 10.6%.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the reason I ask is people see the big numbers and I think it's that because solve astronomical problems, which is usually not the case. Well, is that unusual? An unusually high reserve for a school district or even like a business or anything? What kind of funds do we like to have on reserve for emergency contingencies?
Well, let's recall that these funds have been generated primarily in the pandemic and post-pandemic years due to the fact that the district in the latter part of 2019-20 and in 2021 was not operating at full capacity. There was a hybrid model of instruction for a period of time. So in prior years, this district did not generate surpluses in the operating budget. So this is rather unusual, but very welcome in terms of being able potentially to delay the fiscal cliff and mitigate against the impact of the fiscal cliff. Now, I know you're aware, Mr. Sokolovic, and for the benefit of everyone, that this district has historically been underfunded. So we are underfunded in comparison with our peer districts. Therefore, in each year, the percentage growth in the operating budget has been very low. And in fact, I believe in my document, so if you look at this chart, you can see that the total growth in the operating budget in 22-23, the current year, was 0.78%. So that is very low. Most districts ask for anywhere between 2 and 5% each year. The average over the last 8 years is 1.12%. So it's very difficult for a district to operate with that percentage. With that said, the point is that in each year, without a sufficient percentage growth increase in state and city revenue, the district is always going to be short of the operating funds required to maintain the basic or core educational program. By basic program, I'm referring to the essential services needed to operate school buildings. We have to have a principal. We have to have clericals, in some schools, assistant principals. There have to be teachers in each classroom in accordance with the contractual caps, and hopefully the class size is lower, much lower than the cap. We have to maintain our facilities. We have to provide transportation. So these are the core services, and without sufficient funding, we're always going to be short. In the last three years, we've been able to generate savings. We are harvesting or capturing those savings for a future day in order to mitigate against the severe impact of the fiscal cliff. Now, will it be, to answer your question another way, will it be enough? Right?
That's the next question.
Yeah.
And I don't know yet, quite honestly, whether that will be sufficient. It's clearly going to be sufficient to take us through the current year, as I'll explain when I review the budget gap plan. I am hopeful that there will be sufficient remaining funds. I should say very hopeful, based on the magnitude of the amount on reserve, that we will have sufficient funds remaining in the ISF at the end of the current year to carry us through 2024-25. Will we have a sufficient balance to carry us through 25-26? I can't answer that question today. It's impossible to know at this time. There are a multitude of variables that impact the budget. And let's keep in mind that in Bridgeport, the special ed population is currently close to 20%. The English language learner population has been growing. It's approximately 25%. And the needs of those groups of students are very important, as are the needs of all of our other students. And there are cost factors attached to providing sufficient and satisfactory services in terms of the educational program.
All right. When you say carry us through, is that are you including the the Essa grant funded positions that carry us through at the current level, or carry us through?
No, I was actually referring to the shortfall in the operating budget alone.
So that's not even including all the positions we added. So those positions are basically off the table when we're discussing carrying us through.
At this point in time, since we still have ESSER funding for the current year, 22-23, and we'll have it for 23-24, meaning we have basically still 2 years to go. We've only completed 1 full month of the school year in 22-23. With 2 years ahead, at this point in time, I would predict that all or most of the services in the Essa grants would end, unless there are supplemental grants awarded by the federal or state government. There's always the possibility that there will be other types of grants, probably not at the same magnitude as ESSER, but hopefully at a lower level. Will that happen? We don't know. It may or may not. But that's a variable to consider as we move ahead. We are striving to sustain certain types of positions to the greatest extent possible. And by that, I mean I'm moving positions into sustainable sources of funding as those sources become available. So, for example, I mentioned the ELL positions that have been funded in ESSER, and I indicated that last year we funded 6 in ESSER. This year we're funding 3. Well, we still have the same need. The need has not declined. We're still funding 6 positions, but 3 are in ESSER. I was able to move 3 out of ESSER into state bilingual and Title III grants due to the additional funding provided by the state.
Thank you.
Mr. Benaham, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. Good evening, Ms. Siegel. In the beginning, I know you talk about something about nutrition, and I just want to catch you a little information, but I ask you, when it's nutrition center, they have the separate budget, or that nutrition center is including in our budget? Because what I heard that they carry, they deal with a different budget, or it's the same budget that in the information you're giving to us.
They have a totally separate budget. It's called the 01-900 budget, whereas the Board of Ed has the 800 series of accounts. So the Food and Nutrition Center is funded in the 01-900 series of accounts. It's a totally separate budget. It is completely funded by revenue generated through the state and federal grants. The revenue is allocated by the state on the basis of the claims for meals served. And the Nutrition Center manages that budget. I oversee that management of the budget, and I take the lead on working with them in designing the budget plan in order to ensure that it stays balanced. And I review their financial report every week and create the variance reports and review those reports with them. But every dollar that is generated by Food and Nutrition Services in terms of state and federal revenue must be utilized to support food and nutrition services.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Siegel. Appreciate it.
Ms. Siegel, I have one question. Could you remind me how much we were projected to have in our ISF towards the end of the year? So what was actually projected? I see that we did end in a surplus, but how much was originally projected?
Well, at the start of 21-22, we didn't know whether or not we would generate a surplus in that year. So at the start, we were not projecting that we would be able to add any funds to the ISF. It was initially projected based on the data available that we would have to withdraw funds. So I would say, to try and answer your question directly, I go back to the numbers. We landed at 24.6 with the addition of 2646,188. So if we deduct that, it would be about 22 million. So I would say we originally expected 22 million. We did anticipate being able to generate in food and nutrition the funds required to finance the health insurance costs of the retirees in food and nutrition. As I indicated, we don't move the money into the ISF until the end of the fiscal year, but I always set up that amount on the health line, and I work with food and nutrition so they're aware it's there. If they had a need during the school year for the purchase of supplies or any other service, we would release a portion of the funds. Fortunately, in the last few years, we have not had to release the funds. They've been able to function very effectively. So we set up at the start of the year funds on the health line in the food nutrition budget for deposit in the ISF to reimburse the district for the funds originally paid at the start of the year. So we did expect to be able to generate funds for the retirees. I was hopeful it would be between 800 and $1 million. I was actually able to add 1,250,000. So in summary, I would say we expected to land at a minimum at 22 million. We generated the 2.6 million in the operating budget due to the factors that I delineated. And there was an internal generated surplus of 3 million. So we landed at 27.7.
Thank you. Okay. I don't see any hands up. Any more questions or comments before we move on from this agenda item? In that there's none, we're going to move over to agenda item number 3, which is the 22-23 financial operating budget and budget gap plan.
All right. So at this point, I am going to bring up on the screen a new document. All right. I just need a moment to zoom it. All right. So this is an Excel document with 2 tabs. And in the first tab, I put the operating budget for 22-23 and some historical data for your reference. And the historical data was extracted from the budget history document, which is posted to the website. And I had also asked Rita to share it with you in advance of the meeting. So at the top, you will see the operating budget for 22-23. And this is the budget that the Board of Education would adopt. I believe in January, we presented the budget request. The board approved the budget request, and the actual budget in terms of city revenue and state revenue isn't known until a point in the summer. And so at that time, after we do the end of year close, or as we do the end of year close, we engage in various analytical processes and update the budget plan. So in terms of the operating budget, the city contribution is 73,040,631. That reflects an addition of $2 million compared to the prior year, and that is 27.9% of the total budget. The state ECS has 2 components. The state share of 164,195,344, that never changes, or I should say it has never changed. We would like it to change, but it has never changed. And then there is state alliance ECS of 24,764,531. Now that amount, that alliance amount, you can see here on this line, increased by $15,434. Originally in the spring, we thought it was going to increase only by $11,000. It subsequently increased by $15,000. However, you can see that in prior years, going back to 15-16, that was a year in which it increased by 3.3 million. Then there were 2 negative years, and then a year with almost 1.6, and then 2.6, over 2 million. Another year over 2 million. The prior year 1.5 million. So we are operating in 22-23 with basically a shortfall of 1.5 million, because we had originally anticipated that that the Alliance ECS grant would increase. You may be wondering, well, why would it be significantly less? And the best answer I can give is two parts. First, the district population, along with the population in other school districts, has declined during the pandemic and post-pandemic year. In addition, it could be that the state reduced the size of the grants in light of the availability of the ESSER funding. So those are two potential factors that may have contributed. So our total budget is $262,506,000, and the state share is 72.1%. The growth factor compared to the prior year, again, for operating expenses, 0.78%. And that is quite low compared to the amount, as I said earlier, that would be expected by a typical school district. Typically, I believe the amount would be anywhere between 2% and 5%. And then there are some bar graphs here to illustrate the budget amounts and the percentages. So that is the budget that would be adopted. Now, I spoke earlier about the shortfall that periodically occurs in the operating budget, where operating budget pertains to the funds applied to the core educational needs and services of the school system. And when we presented the original budget request, I believe the original gap was between 17, 18 million at that time. I've been able to reduce it to around 16 million based on the end of year condition for 21-22, in particular, the experience with special education out of district students. Will the reduced number that I referred to earlier be maintained? That's an open question. We're remaining optimistic. In any event, in light of the availability of the other fund sources that we have in the current year, specifically ESSER, I believe it's safe to reduce the need. Now, that was the need before we knew the revenue. So in order to close a gap, we first apply revenue. So we received 15,434 for the in state revenue, the Alliance ECS edition. We received 2 million in city revenue. And in federal and state grants, we did receive an additional $325,400 for federal and state bilingual funds. That's the state bilingual grant and the federal Title III grant. In special education, the IDEA grant did increase by $108,854. Title IV net of the non-public school amount. So there are certain grants for which there are components that are prescribed for non-public schools. So you know, we are the fiduciary, so we just have to deduct that from the grand total. So the net amount or net increase for the public schools was 82,553. However, our state priority grant, which has three components, the main grant, the extended school hours, and the summer grant, That declined by 76,657. And our Title IIA grant, Title IIA is used for recruitment, specifically teachers, but it can be used for other school staff as well, including administrators. So Title II focuses on recruitment and professional development. Unfortunately, that was reduced as well. And then I built in the expectation, potential expectation of up to $1 million in additional funding from the state for the out-of-district students. Why? In the state regulations, there was a new, there was a change approved in the law, and I included in this document the quote from that law, which basically says that the excess cost grant formula now contains a measure of town wealth used to determine the reimbursement percentage a town receives when the state appropriation does not meet the amount of grants payable. So in light of the economic status of Bridgeport, certainly this would be beneficial to Bridgeport. However, as I wrote in the next field, while this provision should reduce the cost percentage for Bridgeport and increase our reimbursement, we can't really make a definitive prediction of additional revenue, considering the factors that are entailed in the calculation. The exact language pertains to the application of the wealth factor when the amount of money allocated by the state for the entire state doesn't meet the amount of grants payable. So we will see for the first time this year how that's applied. Now, I feel safe in putting this number in because if it's not realized at that level or not realized at all, we do have reserves in the Essa grant that I can apply in accordance with the Essa guidelines. And then we also are going to be applying $1 million in Title I revenue. The Title I grant in 22-23 is relatively stable compared to the prior year. However, in the prior year, it did increase. We have used those funds for non-recurring expenses in light of the fact that we don't know whether Title I will at some point decline. Title I is based on the prior year's enrollment. And so we are going to continue to apply approximately $1 million to Title I eligible expenditures in our strategic plan. So we do use Title I for special ed resource paras, as an example. We do use it for tutoring, and we certainly use it for curriculum renewal, such as reading assessments. And then in Essa, we're going to apply at least $1 million, most likely more, to close the gap. And here again, we would be utilizing the Essa funds in accordance with the Essa guidelines for services that traditionally we would have funded through other sources, thereby conserving the funding in the operating budget. And then in the next section, this is a section that I have titled over the years, Deficit Prevention Mode. And basically, it consists of a series of controls that are in effect throughout the finance area in the district, which means it applies to all offices in the district, for cost control and management. And that includes harvesting or capturing the savings that result from unfilled positions or positions filled by substitute staff. So it's not an outcome that we want in terms of unfilled lines or lines covered by substitutes. And I know that was a major topic of discussion at the board meeting on Monday. But when it happens, we make certain that we secure those savings. And then we have the balance of the gap, which we will close with the internal service fund reserves. And that amount currently is approximately $7 million. I've indicated here that I want to try and continue to hold the 2 million pre-18-19 surplus. That was the pre-Connecticut Partnership surplus. Continue to hold those funds because there should always be a reserve in the internal service fund in the event that there's a deficit in any particular year. We were fortunate that there was an internally generated surplus in 21-22. I indicated that that was an unusual phenomenon, welcome, but unusual. And the reverse condition of a deficit could result in another year. So we want to try and hold that 2 million. The fiscal year 20 surplus, the first pandemic year, 6.5 million, hypothetically, tentatively, is in our GAP plan. Hopefully we won't have to use it or use it to that extent, but that's in the GAP plan. And then in the 2021 surplus, just want to fix it. In the 2021 surplus, we had approximately 12 million, actually 12.1. So we would take any additional balance from that amount. And in order to get to zero, I needed 393 to 10. Now, here is a summary once again. So 21-22 ended with a net surplus of 2,646,188. Food and nutrition ended with a surplus of 6.4. However, we have to deduct from the 6.4 the amount owed to the district for the retirees and the workers' comp reserve. So when we deduct that, we have 5,170,597. We are going to remove $1 million for equipment, restore that to the 22-23 food and nutrition budget. So they have a credit towards the purchases of equipment that they've been making since July when the new fiscal year began. And then the balance of their $6.4 million surplus made up of these three parts, the 1.25 million, the million, and the 4,170,597. The balance 4,170,597. That balance is on reserve in the ISF solely for food and nutrition. So this section is entitled the district section. So in terms of the district section, the amount that we added for the district was 3,896,188, and that matches the number that I referred to earlier. And again, that 3,896,188 is basically composed of two parts: our operating surplus of 2.6 and the 1.2 million, 1.25 million to be exact, added from the food and nutrition budget to pay for the food and nutrition retirees and the workers' comp reserve. And those funds belong to the district. The balance of the food and nutrition surplus belongs to food and nutrition, and we will ensure that those funds are used only for food and nutrition services. So we added 3,896,188. The prior balance was 20,733,273. The internal generated surplus was 3.1, and the final is 27.7. And at the moment, and I want to emphasize that this is tentative, it is subject to change based on the fiscal analysis that we will do throughout the year. but at the moment, we're projecting slightly under 7 million as a withdrawal to close the gap in 22-23, which would leave a balance of 20,844,296. Keep in mind that at the end of 22-23, I'm remaining optimistic that once again in food and nutrition, we'll be able to contribute from the food and nutrition budget to the ISF the amount required to fund the food and nutrition retirees. So if we are again able to transfer in, let's say $1 million, then if the table on the screen were materialized and we had a balance of 20.8, we would be adding another million from the food and nutrition budget for the retirees. That money belongs to the district because the district has already contributed for those retirees from our operating budget, and we would have close to 22 million. Now, I want to go back to the 6.8 or 6.9 million dollars that is indicated as projected, tentative. This amount may increase or decrease depending upon a multitude of variables that we monitor carefully and intensively on a daily basis throughout the year. And those variables include the transportation expenses, the utilities expenses, the substitute expenses, as well as special education expenses. So we're monitoring all of those areas and more. I just mentioned the most significant, some of the most significant areas. So we're monitoring those areas very carefully throughout the year to determine whether there are any upward trends or downward trends. And we are monitoring carefully the Essa accounts to make certain that we fully utilize those resources as well. And so one of our fiscal objectives is to minimize the amount that has to be withdrawn from the ISF to balance the operating budget, minimize it to the greatest extent possible, utilizing the available resources in grants. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Siegel. Do we have any questions from committee members? Mr. Macron, Ms. Brown?
I have a question. Ms. Siegel, is there a set amount of grants that we apply a year?
I'm not sure I understand. A set amount of grant funding that we apply?
Yeah, that we apply for any of our services that are being provided in the district?
Oh, I understand. So we have what are called allocated grants, and there are competitive grants.
Okay.
So the grants that I'm referring to, for the most part, in this meeting, are the allocated grants, meaning that as long as the federal government or the state government continues the grant appropriation under federal or state law, we will receive the funding based on the applicable methodology for allocating those funds. So one example is Title I. Now, we do have to submit an application, so our grants office files the application indicating the required data, and that application would include a description of the various services that we are funding in the Title I grant. But that is called an allocated grant because we can. It's allocated to the district based on a methodology, and we can expect to receive it in each year.
There will be Saturday online classes this Saturday on 418 Cassuth Street. We'll see you there. Thank you.
Another example would be, I mentioned Title III, which is the federal bilingual education grant that is also allocated, but it's based on a methodology, and that methodology would relate to the number of English language learners. There's the state bilingual grant, another example of an allocated grant. The state priority grant, which has the 3 components, the main grant, the extended school hours, and the summer component for the early reading success program. That is allocated each year. Unfortunately, it has declined in the in amount over the years, but it is allocated each year. So when I speak about using grant funds to help offset district expenses related to the district strategic plan, I am referring primarily to the allocated grants. Now, our grants office also applies for competitive grants, both federal competitive grants, state competitive grants, and grants in the private sector. And those grants generally pertain to specific needs or specific schools. There are also school improvement grants that the state allocates to specific schools, and those funds have to be utilized by that school. So those funds are not accessed by the by the district in regard to balancing the operating budget. Have I answered your question?
Yes, only reason I was asking was because a question came up that, what ways that individuals could help support the district financially. And I just want to know if there were specific type of grants outside of the ones that are allocated that we could be applying for, whether that's competitive or not. But thank you.
Yes. So our grants office through Nadira Clark, who is on the call, so she may be able to add some additional information. And Nadira is the Director of Grants Development and Management. So the grants office is continuously searching for additional opportunities. We also have a foundation, the Foundation for Excellence in Bridgeport Public Schools, which seeks contributions, donations for specific purposes, and those funds are accepted as grant awards. But we're consistently searching for new grant opportunities that can provide supplemental services. In general, grants are supposed to provide supplemental services. We are also looking ahead to the fiscal cliff in terms of, and I'm referring to what hopefully won't arrive until after the expiration of ESSER funding, but we're looking ahead and identifying some certain services that are currently in ESSER that we would want to maintain. Now, I know we would want to maintain all of the services, clearly, but we're looking at selected services such as the new teacher leader model, which is over $1 million a year, and attempting to seek alternate sources of funding so that when ESSER ends, we could have an alternate source to maintain that particular model. So we are looking at other sources of funding to try to maintain services to the extent possible, as well as to introduce renewal in certain areas now that would endure for an extended time period. For example, we've allocated some funding in ESSER for library renewal, and our chief academic officer is working on a plan for library renewal. And we are anticipating getting a grant through the state senators fund that we applied for last year that will add, hopefully, we don't have the grant award yet, but we're very hopeful that we will have $2 million through that source of funding to supplement the ESSER funding and engage in district-wide library renewal, including what would be called e-library renewal, electronic library renewal as well, but do it in a way where we have at least a 5-year sustained period ahead. Right.
Thank you.
Nadira, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, you pretty much summed it up. I was going to just tag on to Committee Member Brown. Definitely, we are always accepting donations. It could come directly to the foundation or to the district. Everybody knows where I am, and just in case they don't, it's nclark1@bridgeportedu.net or call the office. I'm, more than happy to walk anybody through who wants to make either a really big ticket or a small ticket donation. But we're definitely going after the allocated or entitlement grants, as Marlene indicated, and everything else under the sun. Definitely, there's a lot of supplemental programming we've had with the new ESSER funding that has come in, and we are still looking for ways to diversify our portfolio, as I like to call it, so we can just maintain as we go along, because these grants do expire. And there's no other way to do this than to just keep on finding new sources and raising money as best we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms.
Yes, go
Siegel?
ahead, Ms. Macaron.
Okay, Ms. Siegel, I would like to just mention, I really appreciate the hard work that you and your staff have done for us tonight to present the budget, and I will just need, I'm new to the finance committee and new to the board. I just need to spend a little bit more time studying your reports, but I do want to thank you very much for doing a great job tonight. I really appreciate what you did.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Sokolovic, do you have any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Benningham?
No question this moment, Chair. Thank you.
So Ms. Siegel, as you know, I'm new to being chair of the finance committee, and I'm a lawyer. So the stereotype is lawyers aren't that great with math. So I'm just going to need something to refresh my memory.
Sure.
The operating budget for the 22-23 school year, go back at the very top. Wait, the columns are the same. Is that supposed to be a 21-22 school year? So if you look at on the screen.
I'm sorry, what are you referring to?
Column C, row 4, it says 22-23. Is that supposed to be the 21-22?
No, that's our current year, 22-23.
Okay, that's our current year. And then we go down, it's the same amount from the city. So it's just the city of Bridgeport only gave $2 million. Is that the same from the previous school year? Like, is that the flat funding that I hear, that terminology, that we didn't get any additional funds from the city?
They gave us an increase of $2 million.
So how much did we receive from the city last year?
The amount from the city last year is on this line. That was $71,040,631, $2 million less.
I'm failing to understand that, but.
I'm sorry, what is the question? Can I help to explain it?
We made a request to the city for additional money for the operating budget. And as far as I'm aware, we got nothing extra, right?
No, we received $2 million. We asked for $8 million.
Am I missing something?
Yeah, we back 3 years back, it was promised 2 million a year. So we've been increasing by 2 million each year. It's been a consistent $2 million. So maybe that's why you're seeing it as the same, because it's increased by the same amount.
Oh, okay.
But it is increased for 2 million. But brings up a quick question. Let me just
Yeah, you can go ahead and jump in.
Here because we were promised an extra $500,000, but between some sort of power struggle between the mayor and city council, our children were shortchanged that additional $500,000. Have we had any conversations about getting that $500,000 that was first promised and then yanked back?
No, there have been, there's been no indication that there would be any additional money forthcoming from the city.
Okay. And then I'm just going to piggyback on my confusion previously, Ms. Siegel. I'm looking at the state ECS. Are you saying that we only got an additional $15,000 from Hartford for this school year?
That's correct, $15,434.
I'm sorry, someone in the audience is laughing, me too. This, wow. Yeah, that's definitely wow. I apologize. I may be mixing up something that you may have said in the budget variance to something here where you had, and I'll have to probably double check. But it was a column where you had mentioned that it's based off of the city's revenue. I'll have to come back or follow up with you regarding it because I don't have it clearly in my head. But I do have another question for, I believe it's Ms. Clark. Her name's not showing on the screen anymore. How much money do we receive in donations?
It varies. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was like, if you have a ballpark figure of how much you receive or how much you received for last school year.
Let me give you a quick number. If you give me a couple of minutes, I'll give that to you. It varies because we have money coming in from the foundation and we have direct donations to the district as well. My apologies, I didn't mean to leave dead air. My document is not opening. I will give you the number in the chat. But we're probably, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for your understanding.
Okay. So just for clarification, Ms. Siegel, the final operating budget, we have to present this to the board for approval, correct?
Yes, so the board would be approving the operating budget of $262,506,000. And I would be presenting the gap plan as presented this evening.
Okay. Because of the wording that we have on our agenda, I think a way we can be able to present this, because it doesn't say discussion and action, is I would need a motion to amend the agenda.
Mr. Chair.
Huh?
Point of order, I'm sorry.
Point.
This is considered special meeting, really can't add, but if you want to affect what you want, just email John or superintendent, have them then put it on the agenda that way. They can add it that
Even
way.
at a committee with 2/3,
No.
then we can add.
It's considered a special meeting.
Oh, because it's committee level.
Right.
Can't do the same like in a regular. Okay. I'll reach out to the chair and the superintendent, so that way this could be presented. But at this time, we can't take action because we didn't give notice to the public that we would be taking action on this topic.
Okay.
Any questions or? Okay, so we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is just an update on the status of the ARP ESSER funds. What's the expenditures for the 2021-2022 school year?
All right, I'm just going to need a moment to bring up another document. Great. So in terms of the Essa grants, there were 3 Essa grants. The first one was known as CARES, or Essa 1, and that grant started in 2021, and it has now been closed. It expires on September 30th, and you can see on the screen that we started with about 8.7 million. And we spent in 2021, 7.2 million. In the next year, almost 1.5 million. And then as of July 1, we carried forward 11,141, which we closed in the summer. So we are done with ESSER 1. Now ESSER 2 is 44,640,438. And that is basically started last year. It expires September 30th of 23. So we expect by June to have close to 100% expended, and then to close in the summer. Now in 21-22, we expended 21,702,392. That leaves a balance of 22,938,046. And that full amount will be expended over the course of this fiscal year, and any remaining balance will be expended in the summer, so that we can close by September 30th of 2023. ARP ESSER expires September 30th of 24. And so it's going to overlap with ESSER 2 in 22-23 current year. Last year we spent 20,181,147, leaving a balance of 80,145,351. And as I indicated, for both ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER, the balance of the funds will be expended as per our budget plan. Keep in mind that in ARP ESSER alone, we have a balance of about 14 million on hold for facilities, out of an original budget of around 23 million. And we have money on hold for curriculum renewal, which includes the library project that I mentioned. We have almost 6 million on hold for technology, and that's in ARP ESSER alone. We have reserves to help schools with the purchase of new furniture. We have youth education programming agreements that were devised in conjunction with the city for $2 million per year. We have in ESSER 2 in the current year, the teacher leader stipends, the peer support stipends. We have extended day programs in the schools. We have a perfect attendance incentive bonus that may go as high in total for the full year. It could be around 500,000. That's the projection. It may be higher or lower. We have the supplement to our school operating budgets. We have the easy teachers, the ASI, elementary academic support instructors. We have the additional social workers and guidance counselors, and a multitude of other, services. So we are expending funds in accordance with the plan. And as I indicated, the district is on track to expend all of the funds according to the plan. And thank you. That's it. This note doesn't belong here.
Okay, I'll open the floor up to any questions from committee members.
No questions.
Brown?
At this
Mr. Macaron?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Sokolovic?
Yes, since the ESSER 1 funds are basically pretty much closed out, can we get a similar post? I'm looking through the website now and I don't see the ESSER broken down unless I'm missing it and you could direct me towards it. Just what the money was spent on, similar to the operating budget where it's broke down by lines and spreadsheets. I'm sure might be a little difficult to post, but we'll always ask the questions. I mean, we could point them to anything on.
Well, it was done over 3 years. Let me ask, Nadira, was there the final report submitted to the state? Can we generate that report and provide it to the board?
Yes, the final report was submitted. We can get a copy to the board.
Okay.
Thank you. And is it possible to also ask Mr. Testani to just get it posted to the website so the public could actually view it as well? Because that's one of the major questions we get asked as board members: where'd the money go? And can you show us what we spent it on?
Yes, absolutely. But as I indicated, CARES is just closing now on September 30th. I believe that all of our payments have been made. In other words, all funds are liquidated. There were interim reports required by the state. So, as soon as the final report is available, we'll post it and share it.
And would it be problematic to post? I guess it probably would be like draft forms. That would probably create too much confusion amongst the public. There would be changes.
It would not be feasible in light of the multitude of services and we move money from one category to another on a regular basis based on needs.
Right. Yeah, so I guess it's best just to do it at the closeout. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Benaham, do you have any questions?
No questions, Maureen. Thank you.
Excuse me, I have a question for Joe, if I may.
Yes, you may, Mr. Macaron.
Thank you. Joe, do you want to, do you think we should first review the ESSER 1 CARES expenditures before we send them out to the public so that we can at least answer questions that might come up? I mean, I don't know how you guys do this, but I would think that we might want to make sure that we understand what these expenditures were before we send them out.
Well, not all of us are always going to understand everything, and I understand your point to be ready. But as we're discussing stuff right here, right now, some of this is just an internal thing that we're discussing, and this is public information now just by via us discussing it and being at the meeting. So it's just a matter of putting it in an additional place.
Okay, just my thought.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Siegel, I do have a question. On the committee level, are we notified when monies move into where and who determines what's the need? Like, is it just a change in cost? Like, I heard the term like we move the money as needed, but
Well, for example, if we have an ESSER, several $1 million on hold for various types of curriculum renewal projects, if a project has a lower cost factor than anticipated and the superintendent notifies me that there's a need in another area, I'm going to reduce the amount in the curriculum area and move it into perhaps the facilities area or the technology area. The original plan specified categories of need. So we will move based on changes in costs. We moved based on changes in need for the district, and that is done internally in my department.
okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes, I recognize you, Ms. Brown. You have the floor.
I know Ms. Siegel mentioned that there were a few things that, I can't remember the three of them, but that are on hold that are going to be used in ESSER 2, I believe. Am I correct, Ms. Siegel?
I believe I stated that we have funds dedicated to broad categories such as facilities and curriculum renewal and technology. So there are specific projects within those areas. For example, in facilities, the facilities department has a plan for the expenditure of those funds. For example, for new HVAC units in particular schools. So the funds are reserved for those specific projects.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, like, I appreciate you spelling it out that way, just so that if anyone asks, well, why is these funds set aside? You know, what is the timeline if they're going to be spent, that people understood what that meant. So it was just for clarity.
Ms. Siegel, I have a question to follow up to Ms. Brown's question. How much money is on hold for facility costs?
Well, we actually gave you for tonight the report you requested on facilities. So
we'll get to that topic.
I include, yeah, if you would like to wait, I can bring that up on the screen, and or would you like me to cover it now?
Let me make sure there's no other questions. Mr. Macaron?
I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Benahan?
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we're fine. Any more questions
No,
regarding
thank
the ARP, sir? Okay. So we're going to actually move on to the next topic because it does segue perfectly. An update and discussion of the 2021-2022 facilities costs.
All right. So we shared with the board this document on the screen, which has two tabs. And the first tab is the final cost
Ms.
for
Siegel,
21.
could you zoom in a little bit? Sorry to cut
Yes,
you off.
absolutely. Is that better?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
So this document, I'm just going to scroll up here so you can see the table, and you can filter this if you like. And scrolling down. So last year, facilities expended $22.4 million in the operating budget. Now, we also provide services in Alliance. So remember, Alliance is Alliance ECS, and I regard that as operating money, but it is allocated as a grant, so we have it on a separate line. But Alliance ECS for utilities and other type of services, about $2.4 million. And then in the priority grant, we fund the utilities for the Classical Studies Annex at St. Peter's. That's the Early Childhood Center. And that was $38,212. And then in the Essa Grants, they spent over $5 million. And so they spent $29.8 million, almost $30 million. Now, the next tab is 22-23 to date. I know on the, I'm going to zoom this in for you.
Thank you.
Now I know on the on the agenda you indicated summer, but it would have taken an inordinate amount of time to extract only the summer. So we did it in the most expedient way, which is year to date. So it does include September data. And if we scroll over here, you can see that they've expended to date out of a budget of about 22.1 million, 8.277, so about 8.3 million to date. In Alliance, they have a budget of 2.5 million, excuse me, 2.5 million. They've expended 810,895. The Classical Studies Annex for the utilities, I've allowed 41,000. They've expended 1857.95 to date. And in the Essa Grants, let's stop here for a second and look at my Essa chart. So this is the chart I created when we wrote the Essa Grant, and they gave us a budget which superintendent approved and I approved for $23.7 million in these 6 categories, ranging from HVAC assessment to custodial equipment. And so that is the amount that we have allocated. In 21-22, they expended about 5 million, which I showed you in the other tab. So their balance was 18,670,606. And to date, they have put in orders totaling 4,572,235. So the balance is about 14 million. Okay, so when I say there's 14 million on hold for them, I'm saying it's reserved for specific projects in these categories. So they not only gave us a plan with dollar amounts in categories, they had specific projects to which they were committing in those categories. So the grand total budget current year 43.3 million, and year to date 13.6. The balance is about $20 million.
Thank you. I'll open up the floor to committee members for any questions. Ms.
No
Brown, Mr. Macaron. Mr.
No
Macaron,
questions. No questions, thank you.
Mr. Sokolovic.
Yes, that's one. I just don't understand one of the titles. If you look at, I got one up right now. Line 411, something called acting pay for custodians. What does acting pay stand for?
Oh, well, acting pay occurs when, for example, if a let's suppose a custodian 2 is going to be absent for an extended period of time, perhaps on a leave. If a custodian 1 is assigned to cover that position during the leave or to cover a vacancy temporarily, the custodian 1 would be given a salary differential, the differential between a custodian 2 salary and a custodian 1 salary for the period of time that the individual serves in the higher level title.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Benahan, do you have any questions regarding the facilities costs?
No question.
I'm sorry, I just have one question for Ms. Siegel.
Yeah, I recognize you, Mr. Macaron. You can have the floor.
I'm sorry, I should have, I'm not good with Robert's rules, I'm sorry. But the grand total is 43,356,389. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's the budget. Now, can you move over to the right a little bit?
Yes.
To the left, whatever you want to, whichever way you want to go. Now, you said that we've spent already 13,662,000.
Yes.
So the balance is 20 million? Or should that balance be 30?
Oh, I'm sorry, did I make an, let me see if there's an error here, sorry. Oh, sorry about that.
Good catch.
Let me just check this.
Don't forget the equal.
29,693,729.
Okay, 29, so it's a few more million.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. No more questions.
Okay. Ms. Siegel, I have a question. If you can move the chart back the other way. A little bit more. I'm sorry, I don't have my laptop with me, so I'm kind of either switching from my phone or looking on the screen. Could you tell me what are some of our approved HVAC projects? Do you know of those? That's $15 million allocated towards that.
They have various projects in various schools. I wouldn't have the specifics. I can go back to the grants plan because each time they submit an order, I keep a record of it, but I wouldn't, you would have to ask the facilities department for specifics.
Okay, I'll do that. I don't have any further questions.
Chair.
Oh, Mr. Benahan?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. I just want to follow the record. I know Ms. Narita Clark sent something in the chat. She can say it, so be in the record.
Yes, and I apologize. I literally got a new computer today, and when I opened the file, it had to load completely. So the item that I put in the chat was just an explanation of our current donations, and donations do not expire until we use it. They're there. So right now our current number is 299,909. These are from various accounts that we've had open just as of recently. This summer, probably going back to 2018, or excuse me, 2017 is the oldest item I believe that's on the list.
Thank you so much, Ms. Clark.
Thank you.
I went back to my grants plan, and I mean, I see notes on HVAC services for Waltersville. I see Fairchild Wheeler. Another note says various schools. Another note has various schools. So again, I don't have the specifics without going back to each of these orders and looking at the specific quotations for the vendors. But they did do an order in July for $2.3 million. My note indicates HVAC orders, various schools. They also had an order for almost $900,000 for various playgrounds and equipment. And then there are other individual orders for HVAC units.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Siegel. Just for clarification, Ms. Siegel, the chart you're presenting to us, I know you mentioned it was a hard ask that I presented, but at the from my perspective, at the very right hand of your screen, you did present what was expended during the summer, correct? Yeah.
This second tab, we ran this. Munis was down on Thursday and Friday for the hard close of 21-22. So we ran this on Monday. So it was as of Monday. So it includes July, August, and part of September.
Okay. I asked that because it does address item number 6, which is just an update and discussion of facility costs for summer 2022.
Yes, and I mentioned that, unfortunately, with the time constraints, and with Munis being down for 2 days last week, we weren't able to extract July and August only.
Okay. That's fine, as we've discussed it in this bullet. So what we'll do is we'll go on to item number 7 on the agenda, which is an update on all pending contracts for the Board of Education's approval for the 22-23 school year.
Right? Bring up another document. Right. So the document that we shared in advance, and I'm sure this is appearing as too small, so let's zoom this. Actually, Ms. Clark prepared this, so I'm going to ask her if she could say a few words about the document.
Yes, correct. So these items are for grants we've either submitted recently or over the summer. Just for some context, the state gives us lots of grant deadlines right when school is about to open or in these first couple of weeks. So we're submitting items right now, as Marlene referenced earlier in her conversation, as she was delineating between operating grants and district grants that are specific for schools. Those are the school improvement grants for various schools. Those grants applications were submitted last week. So we know within those budgets, there are a couple of vendors that will have notably amounts that they would end up with contracts that would need to be approved by the board. And so we have items for Barnum, Bassick. Bassick has 2 different vendors they're engaging, and BMA, and I believe Dunbar will also have a contract. Some of them are going to specific community organizations or within the state, obviously. We do have an award. So Marlene, you're a little bit in the middle. Let me just pull up my version. That's for SPPT. We're in the middle of doing some negotiation with the state. We did put in our proposal that there would be an award or a contract that would be going to a local organization as well. The next step we have on our list is for our extended school hours grants. We have 2 larger grants. Contracts that do go for classical. Those we would probably be bringing relatively quickly. That application was submitted towards the end of August. We are waiting for the notice of award, but we do start services towards the middle of October. I believe they start their program, so we'll have a contract ready in that regard. The school improvement grants, those we're just waiting to make sure that the state has officially received and done their pre-review before we start moving ahead. These grants obviously are for major services happening at the school, so we try not to delay too much with moving forward, because while they're not all entitlement grants, we know that they're coming, so we want to make sure that the services are engaged. The JDC ESSER 2 grant, that is still to be determined. In the middle of August, we were notified of additional funds that the state would be releasing from their ESSER 2 for this program. We do not have a final contract yet, so this is still sort of in not limbo per se, but not being brought up as a major item. But we do know we'll have a contract that needs to be provided to hopefully a local provider that could give these services to the JDC.
Thank you, Ms. Clark.
You're welcome.
At this time, I'll open up the floor to the committee members. Mr. Macarone, do you have any questions?
No, I don't, but we only have 1 minute left in the meeting according to Teams. So I don't know
I just asked him. He
No,
says,
don't worry, that's a false alarm.
Okay, thank
Don't
you.
get your hopes so high. I'm just kidding.
Oh, no.
Ms. Brown, do you have any questions?
No questions.
I'll open the floor up to board members. Mr. Sokolovic, do you have any questions?
None on this item, thank you.
Mr. Benaham?
No question, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Ms. Clark touched upon one item that I did want to know is just like timeline for execution. So classical studies, for example, should be coming to our attention fairly soon because it's mid-October.
Correct, yes.
No, please continue. Sorry.
No. So I appreciated this being requested because the idea is that we would send this over to Contracts Committee and then it would come over to the full board for approval with the principal being available for comments or questions. If necessary, we will have the providers or vendors available as well to answer any specific questions.
The next question I do have is, do you know of any that's currently on our list that should be coming this semester in the school year? So classical studies is one, but I guess I want to keep an eye out on upcoming deadlines. So if there is something that needs to be renegotiated or brought to a vendor's attention in contracts, we can do it before any kind of consequences or stipulations in executing the contract. If you get what I'm saying, like, I want to make sure we're ahead of the ball with deadlines instead of being forced.
Yes, I very much understand. That's why I prefaced the Essa Grants the way that I did. We submitted last Friday. That goes through a review process. It was the same thing that happened to us last year. We had to wait for the state approval. They did have questions on the budget, so I didn't think that we would be in a great place if we'd gone ahead and executed contracts and then they'd come back with questions. We did embark on a really good promise of doing the grant review outside of the system this year. So we did that over the summer. So the final submission we did should be final. The state contact was working with us on all of the budget items, all of the narrative items, but I always, appreciate that type of work, but it's never completely finished, which is why I wanted to give her at least a week or two with that application in hand, and I can do a follow-up knowing that it's going through the system before I bring these contracts explicitly for final approval of the board. With us working ahead of the ball game than we did last year, where I believe we were bringing contracts probably the beginning of December because they gave us the notice of award towards the end of November, and that was tough for the schools.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Are there any additional questions from board or committee members? Okay. Seeing that there are none, would anyone like to make a motion on item number 8 on the agenda?
Is that to adjourn?
Yes.
Yeah, would you like to make that motion?
I would like to make that motion to adjourn. Thank you.
Is it seconded? I'll
Second.
say, okay. All in favor? Aye. Thank you so much, Ms. Siegel, Ms. Clark. Thank you everyone for attending. Have a good night.
Thank you,
meeting
same
has
to you.
ended. The time is 8:38.
Thank you, everyone.
God bless you all.
Take care.
Have a good night.